Hello, and thank you for joining us here on the Neutral Zone. I am Phil Milani, joined as always by my good friend at Eric Dalala.
So good to be with you today. I'm excited for this podcast, full of information and only information.
You're not skipping a beat there, like you're already up with the new intro. You like it?
Yeah, I mean, that's what the people want apparently. So we'll give it to them.
Yeah, good friend at Eric Dalala. We have a great show in store for NZ Nation here today. We're going to be talking about the state of the Broncos. We're still a couple of weeks out from the draft, so we figured, okay, free agency is starting to wind down. There's a couple of weeks to go before the draft, before we do our final draft prep. But maybe we talk about the state of the Broncos. The roster is pretty solid right now. Talking about some areas where the Broncos need to address in the draft and maybe how that lines up with the strengths and weaknesses in this 2021 draft.
I love it, Phil. There are still some areas where the Broncos can improve, and team isn't going to look drastically different in a few weeks, I don't think, but could certainly get stronger.
It's possible they do look drastically different, though, with that number 9 pick. Depending on what they want to do, you might be finding some key contributors right away. But a lot of the starters are already locked into their positions. I agree with you there. Eric, yeah. The other thing we wanted to talk about was this week, Aaron Rodgers guest hosting Jeopardy, getting a lot of buzz about how well he's done in that role. It got us thinking, okay, what current Broncos would be great guest hosts of Jeopardy?
Yeah, I mean, Aaron Rodgers has done a very nice job, Phil. Very impressive. He's got the charisma that you need, kind of the gravitas. But I think there's some Broncos that could do a nice job as well.
Yeah, we'll talk about what needs to go into that, what the job sort of entails, and why maybe there's a couple of Broncos who could do the job if called upon. But of course, Eric, we like to start all of our shows off by talking about some of our commenters, some of our fans, some of our haters. Eric, of course, right. we start on YouTube, where you can, of course, watch this. If you're watching this on YouTube, why don't you go ahead and smash that subscribe button? Boop, 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 boop. Smash that subscribe button. Eric, let's start out here with Chris Kim. He says, dude, Eric's voice cracked more than a 13-year-old going through puberty.
Oh my gosh. Did you just make that one up?
No, that is a true comment.
Wow. I don't think that's a very fair assessment.
I know. That's kind of, I thought that was
kind of,
I mean, I know that you pride yourself in your deep tones, your
wow,
baritone.
3 likes. That's whoever liked that. We don't like you either.
Hey, sometimes honest feedback can go a lot further than, just a nice comment, so maybe, I don't know. We got Robert Rubal, I think that's how you say that. You two are freaking awesome. I like that. Nice comment. Christopher Kramer says, you guys are the best. Thank you. Some of our usual fans here, Lisa Lane, Michael Pack, thank you for commenting. Appreciate it. Chris Campbell, great show, funny and informative. It would be cool to have an international football game on an aircraft carrier.
Oh, that would be nice. Yeah, maybe just off of the coast of India so that you could have what you wanted too.
That dates back to last week's episode where we were talking about international games and what would be the craziest, most fun location for an international game. You had a nice one. You said the Coliseum, but I do believe somebody commented and said a football field would not fit on the inside the Coliseum. So, yeah.
Have we fact checked that? I
have not fact checked that.
Okay.
No. Yeah. This is Jussie Viljacanian. An NFL field would not fit into the Coliseum. Sorry. Let's see here. Hammy Goes Ham says, Eric doesn't deserve that intro. He doesn't appreciate my boy Phil.
I do appreciate Phil. I do.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Mo Everything says Phil is no nonsense. What do you think?
It
I'm
seems that you're
usually
just. It seems like you're picking out the ones that are very nice to you.
I'm pretty goofy, I think. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's what. Well, here's one. Dimitri Curis says snoring. And Todd Sharaginian says just Z's.
Wow.
And
Rude.
also Mario Hernandez says straight trash guys. So
Yeah,
straight STR and then the number 8.
yeah.
Straight trash guys. So
Yeah. But Jinja Ninja said this is the best Broncos podcast out there, and our friend Eric Ramos said to keep the intro and that it's an integral part of the show. Eric Ramos is one of the first fans out there.
Yes.
An OG.
That is true. That is true. The intro is a source of great conflict. It
is.
The listeners, the viewers split 50-50. So, it's kind of we need one of those scales like the justice scales, and then maybe we can get an official vote here. But right now we're going with good friend at Eric Dalala.
Well, for now, that'll do.
Eric, there's other ways to get involved in the show than just YouTube comments. You could leave a voicemail at 707 neutral. Leave a voicemail. We'll play it right here on the air. We like to do that. Maybe for the next episode, we can have a call to action here. Leave a voicemail and tell us who you think the Broncos should take with the 9th pick. Leave a voicemail. We'll play it.
Wow.
How else can I get involved, Eric?
I was going to say they can also leave an email at neutralzoneshow@gmail.com. They can tweet at the podcast account, which is at Broncos Podcast. Or Phil, I think they could even reach out to us directly if they wanted to.
Yeah, at Eric Dalala with an A, at Phil Milani with a PH, non-traditional spellings there. So, hey, if you want to say that we're straight trash, you do that on Twitter, not on YouTube.
Yeah, leave the YouTube for the nice comments.
Yeah, exactly. Eric, with that, let's dive into our first topic here, and where we're talking about the state of the Broncos. This roster has come together really nicely, but I think the thing that most Broncos fans are wondering now is, okay, the defense was addressed during free agency for the most part. A lot of additions there, bringing back Shelby Harris and Justin Simmons. Most people, I think, feel like the defense is pretty solid. Maybe add some pieces in the draft. They feel like the offense was addressed in the previous year with a lot of explosive weapons, but the biggest question mark still remains at the quarterback position.
Yeah, I mean, most definitely. I think that when I said there's not going to be any major changes, that's if they don't take a quarterback. Obviously, that represents a major change, and I think it's not overstating it to say the direction of the team, the direction of the franchise for several years will change if they take a quarterback at number 9. Or, more than likely they'd have to move up probably to get one of those guys. It's possible that a Justin Fields or a Trey Lance falls down a little bit, especially if Mac Jones goes at 3 to the 49ers. But to me, Phil, the Panthers trading for Sam Darnold kind of indicated maybe they don't think one of those top 5 guys will be there at 8. Or they just weren't impressed with one of those 5 guys. But yeah, Phil, I whichever you prefer, because I think there's 2 directions a team can go. One, obviously, is to put their faith in one of these prospects and draft them. The other is to kind of to ride it out with Drew Lock, even if you get a veteran to come in and to compete. I think there's a good chance we see Drew Lock start some games this year, and the franchise's direction could change pretty significantly based on how he plays this fall.
Yeah, one of those prized guys seems like is not an option really anymore. Of course, Deshaun Watson dealing with a lot of civil lawsuits right now down in the Houston area. So I think that all but kills any sort of trade talk there. I know there was some rumors about what Russell Wilson's availability might be like with the Seahawks. I would be really shocked at this point if something like that were to happen. So now I think, like you mentioned there, Eric, I think you're talking about bringing in a veteran either to back up Drew Lock, or you're talking about drafting a quarterback. And right now, it really does seem like the value of the quarterback in this year's draft is sky high. I mean, it seems like you're going to have to make a trade with the Falcons at this point. It really does seem like that. So I'm not sure if that's worth it, though, Eric. I mean, they're going to be demanding a lot. You're talking about probably multiple first round picks, more, second, third round picks in addition to that. So, I think that that is asking a lot right now, especially for the fourth pick. I mean, you're talking about the fourth best quarterback, giving up a lot. So, unless you're sold on one of these guys and for a fact that they'll be available at 4, just by doing your homework and understanding what some of these other teams are going to do for sure, that seems like a lot to me in order to trade up and get the fourth best quarterback.
Well, I'll say two things here. One, if you pay attention to the draft trade value chart, which is kind of the like accepted, measurement of how you figure out a trade. The Broncos' 9th pick is worth 1,350 points, and the Falcons' pick is worth 1,800. So that's a difference of 450. And if you look at the draft value chart, 450 is like a middle second round pick. So I don't think, if you were looking at this in a vacuum, it wouldn't cost the same that it did for the Niners, for example, to go all the way up to number 3, because the value obviously falls the further down you go, and to get to the 4th pick is not nearly as valuable as the 1st or 2nd pick. Now, because teams will probably bid against one another because there's a quarterback involved, that value still goes up, and I think that there's a chance that maybe it costs a 1st this year and a 1st next year, or maybe a additional 1st and a 3rd. But I don't think you're talking about being in the range of giving up 3/3 for this pick, or giving up 2 firsts and a 2nd and a 3rd. I think that value may have made sense for the 2nd pick or the 3rd pick, and maybe that was too steep for the Broncos. We don't know if they offered, but obviously they didn't make the move. And so to me, I think that this could be more affordable than maybe people think. It wouldn't necessarily set you back. A trade, Phil, that I saw projected was give up the 9th pick and the 40th overall pick in exchange to get to 4. And there's 2 ways to look at that, Phil. You could look at that as, hey, that's given up Cortland Sutton. That's exactly where he was picked a few years ago. So you could say, is it worth giving up a 1st round pick in Cortland Sutton for one of these quarterbacks? But you could also look at it as, that's not far from where the Broncos picked DeMarcus Walker a couple of years ago. And obviously that pick didn't pan out probably like they hoped. So these draft picks are always kind of a coin flip to some degree. So I do think it's not prohibitive for them to go up.
I was going to say, I know that chart is out there, but I think you could kind of throw that out at this point, just in terms of what the scenario is looking like for this year's class. I mean, there is going to be a team that's really high on Trey Lance, that's willing to give up a lot of these picks if they think he's available, or Justin Fields. I know that before we started recording here, I looked at Pro Football Focus. They had a hypothetical trade out there. They said the Broncos would give up this year's first round pick and a 4th round pick. No, I'm sorry. The Broncos would give up this year's 1st round pick, this year's 2nd round pick, this year's 5th round pick, and next year's 1st. So you're talking about 4 picks, 2 firsts, a 2nd, and a 5th. And then in return, they would get the number 4 overall pick and a 4th round pick. That seems steep to me, if that's like what the price tag would be like, if it would be that high. 2 firsts, a 2nd, and a 5th in exchange for the number 4 overall pick this year and the 4th overall. So,
well, it all depends where you finish. It's quite possible a 5th and a 4th end up being very close to each other, depending on how you finish. You'd like to think that if the Broncos got one of those guys, they would be able to play well, and maybe you're not giving up a top 10 pick next year. You're giving up a pick.
It's this year's 5th and this year's 4th swapping. The only thing would be next year's 1st round pick would be thrown in. So yeah, if the Broncos played well, then that would be a hopefully
first would not be nearly
first.
As. Yeah, no, I agree that to me, if you find your franchise quarterback that way, that's an okay trade to make. I mean, the Chiefs, I believe, gave up a 1st when they went up to get Mahomes. I can check that, but I mean, obviously, nobody remembers that. And we've talked about that when you make a trade that's successful, you're not worried about that sort of thing. I will say, Phil, just to jump up from where the 49ers were to where they got to, from 12 to 3, that's an 1,000-point jump. And so that, for what they gave up, that is pretty close to what this first round chart says. Because if you look at some of these pick evaluations for a late first round pick, which is probably how the Dolphins looked at the 49ers in the future, that's in the 600 range. So I think you're right that it's probably a little bit more and maybe a decent amount more than the draft pick chart, but I think it's always a good place to start just to figure out what you might have to give up. And I'll go back to one of your other points, which was that you'd be getting the 4th best quarterback. Every team has different evaluations. And so, the 4th best quarterback in one team's eyes might be the 2nd ranked quarterback or even the 1st ranked quarterback. I assume most teams have Trevor Lawrence as the first quarterback off their board, but we might see that maybe the Broncos really like Justin Fields or really like Trey Lance, and that one of those guys becomes available and they say, hey, we weren't going to take Zach Wilson over those guys anyway. And so that to me is where, if you just looked at the draft board from last year, Phil, you'd say Justin Herbert was the 3rd best quarterback. Well, it's possible the Chargers thought he was better than that. And after watching him for 1 year, it appears he's better than that. And so to me, as long as those guys are in the same class, kind of the same general category, if you think they can be the player, it doesn't necessarily matter to me if they're the 2nd quarterback off the board, the 3rd quarterback, the 4th. I saw somebody say, Phil, if Justin Fields falls to 9, that means he's not worth it. Aaron Rodgers fell to the mid-20s because once the teams were scared to pass on him, and he was worth it. So, and obviously there's a ton of examples of guys falling. So to me, you got to be true to your own evaluation and your own board. If you think Justin Fields is the 1st or 2nd or even 3rd quarterback and you think that he's worth it, then get him if he's there. Get Trey Lance if he's there, or make this trade if you think it's worth it. But I wouldn't worry too much about, hey, this guy's the 4th quarterback off the board. That means he's the 4th best guy.
I guess I mean the 4th opportunity to pick a quarterback, not necessarily that he's going to eventually end up being the 4th best quarterback.
Right. But that's where if you think, maybe you don't make this trade till draft day. Maybe if Mac Jones indeed is the pick to the 49ers and you're the Broncos and you say, hey, Trey Lance and Justin Fields are both there at 4 and we're going to have the pick of those guys. Let's go up and get the one we want. Then that's a very different situation. So I don't know that how connected they are, but yeah, if you thought that Trevor Lawrence was the best quarterback and you thought Zach Wilson was number 2 and you thought Trey Lance was number 3 and those 3 guys went off the board first and you didn't believe in Justin Fields or Mac Jones, then it doesn't make much sense to go to 4. But if you believe in one of those guys, it doesn't matter where you get them.
Yeah. But considering what you have to give up, you better not miss, I guess is what I'm saying. Is like, if you're going to make that and you're going to lose some of that draft capital, because we know that one of the reasons why they've brought in a guy like George Payton is that he's an excellent evaluator of talent. He wants to draft and develop guys. You're taking away those opportunities to pick players by doing this. So, of course, that doesn't matter if you get your franchise guy. So if you hit, none of it matters. You just better not miss.
Well, but I think if you're the Broncos, you've got to be a little bit more willing to take a chance, because there are some divisions where, say you're in the NFC East right now, you might not need an elite quarterback to win that division because the quality of the rest of the teams is not that high. If you're in the AFC West, you're going to need an elite guy to be able to compete with Patrick Mahomes year after year. And so you can't be afraid to go take that shot if you think it's the guy. I mean, obviously you don't want to miss. If you miss, people at some point probably don't stick around in their current roles, but you gotta, you're not going to find success anyway if you're afraid to go after that guy, whether it's Drew Lock or a veteran that the team acquires, or if it's a draft pick. One way or another, the team has to sort out the quarterback position, because if you look at the last 5 years, Phil, the constant has been the quarterback position has not been good enough, and you're not going to compete with a team like the Chiefs when it's not good enough. And so at some point it no longer becomes okay to say, hey, if we can just if we can just not turn the ball over, or if we can just be average, like that's enough. That to me, that's when you look at Drew Lock, he has to stop turning the ball over. That's true. That's fair. But that's the bare minimum. You can't also just have him throw one touchdown a game and 200 yards. Like, he's got to go out there and make plays and make big plays and have game after game where he's consistent if you want to challenge for the AFC West title.
Yeah, and it seems like those two things are almost counterintuitive, where you're saying, okay, don't turn the ball over, but you also got to go out there and make things happen, and you got to create your own opportunities here. There's like a fine line there. So I agree with you, though. You're going to have to put up points. You're going to have to get in the high 20s, as an average across the season. I think those are all things that are definitely true if you want to try and win this division. But Drew Lock advancing and getting better and working on his game and improving. These Broncos coaches who are inside the building, they know what he's capable of, and maybe that's the route that they think is currently the best option. So that is the quarterback position, though, in a nutshell right now for this Broncos team. Because as we move on here and talk about the rest of the roster, Eric, let's just stick with the offensive side of the ball. It seems like he's got a lot of playmakers around him.
Yeah, and one more thing about Drew there, Phil, is that you have to think about what happens if Drew does take that next step, and what are the chances that's going to happen. Because if you firmly believe that, hey, there's an 80% chance that Drew's going to turn this thing around and he can be the guy we think he can be, then you don't want to waste a pick on a quarterback, obviously, because then you're going to be stuck at the end of next year where you can't afford to stop playing Drew Lock. And now you've got, Trey Lance or Justin Fields on the bench, and then you're in an uncomfortable situation again. So just something to consider, that we don't know what their evaluation of Drew is, but maybe there's a level of, if we can get a guy that's up here, at the highest end of the quarterback position, we make that change. Otherwise, we take the chance that Drew can improve. And you're right, Phil, with the guys around him, every reason to believe that he should be better, even if they don't get the offseason workouts, just from added reps that they'll get from preseason, from hopefully a more normal training camp. His offense should be better. As I look at the roster, Phil, I think there's probably 3 spots on offense where they could use more help. One is the tight end position, which I don't think is super pressing. I think a late round pick or a veteran can be added there just to help in the running game. I think right tackle is a position that they need to sort out. Can you trust Jawan James there, or is it worth using a first round pick on a Penei Sewell or a Rashawn Slater, or getting a guy later that can develop? But then, Phil, I think the biggest question for me is at the running back position. Do they have enough there? Do they need to add a guy? Could they even trade back and take a Najee Harris or a Travis Etienne in the first round? Because Melvin Gordon's got 1 year left on his deal, and I think they could use some more explosiveness at that position.
So just one last thing on the quarterback here. You don't think it would be good to have Drew Lock and Justin Fields?
Well,
you don't think...
I think what I mean there is that if you like say you decide Justin Fields is not ready to start the year, like back in 2016, for example, Paxton Lynch never really, and I know it's Paxton and he didn't pan out at all, so it's a little hard to make a comparison, but there are just quarterbacks that are not necessarily ready to start right away as rookies. Tua, for example, Tyrod Taylor started over Justin Herbert and probably would have sat for longer. Say that Drew comes out and starts playing well and is the clear starter, and that you don't want to, say this team is 6-3 or something when they go to their bye week and Drew is playing well, and you can't afford to put Justin Fields in because Drew's playing well. You got a winning record. You're on the way to the playoffs. And then at the end of the year, you've got to decide, well, hey, what do we do? Like, do we keep rolling with Drew? Do we go to Justin Fields or Trey Lance or whoever it is? That, all I'm saying is, if you get a quarterback, you've got to be committed to going to them. And if Drew plays
That's
well,
exactly
obviously
right.
that ruins everybody's plan.
That's almost an exact situation the Broncos were in when they had Jake Plummer and then they drafted Jay Cutler. Jake Plummer started the season. They were doing well. Late in the season, they made the switch to Jay Cutler, and it was very uncomfortable. I think that that's what you're talking about here. If you draft a guy and move up and take a pick with the fourth overall, that guy's got to play and that guy's got to be your guy and you're committed to that guy. I think that signifies the end of the Drew Lock era if that happens. So
Right. And
I don't think
for
they would run into a situation where they would play Drew Lock. I mean, that would be an uncomfortable situation.
right. And in, correct me if I'm wrong, but obviously that it didn't go so well in 2006. They missed the playoffs, correct?
Yeah, I think they missed the playoffs that season. Yeah, exactly.
And who knows what happens if Jake Plummer stays there? Obviously, he had some games that were rough, that kind of led to that situation. But it just would be like a Ryan Fitzpatrick to a Tagovailoa situation is a little bit different because Fitzpatrick is a career backup. He was never brought there with the intention of being a long-term starter. You're still like right on the edge where you think maybe Drew could be that guy still. And so if he, were to come out on fire and start playing really well, it would just be, like you said, an awkward situation. Not sure how they would handle that. I almost wonder, Phil, if you take a guy like Justin Fields or Trey Lance, and Trey Lance is maybe a little different because I think he needs a little more time to develop. But say you take Justin Fields,
you're looking to move Drew Lock.
Is it worth it to move Drew Lock and get something in return? And I think you'd have to strongly consider that.
Most definitely. You wouldn't want that situation there. I mean, even when Patrick Mahomes was picked, the Chiefs knew what Alex Smith was. They knew exactly what he was all about. So there wasn't even that uncomfortableness there. Whereas Drew right now feels like, okay, I can take this next step and I'm going to get this team to where they need to be. If you draft a quarterback, I think you got to stop that. And you got to bring in somebody to help groom the pick, so.
Yeah. And, in that case, Alex Smith was nothing but great to Patrick Mahomes. Everything we've heard is that he helped him from the very beginning. But he was a veteran at that point. I don't think it's fair to expect Drew in that situation to like take on a mentoring role. I mean, they would be, if Drew stayed in that situation, they would be in an intense competition. And so I just don't know if you want it. It would also be difficult for the locker room, Phil, because you've got a lot of guys who are devoted to Drew Lock, who really support him, who think he can be the guy. If you were to then bring in somebody else and then say, hey, say Cortland Sutton after every training camp practice is asked, who do you want to start? Who looked better today? Is it Drew? Is it this guy? I mean, that puts teammates in a bad position.
Yeah. And plus, if you take a pick that high, you just want his growth to begin immediately, in my mind. I mean, I think that we've seen that the last couple of years around the league too, where you take a high draft pick, you just let them go through their lumps there at the beginning, and then hopefully you come out the other end a little bit better. So, yeah. I think that if they made that move to take one of these top quarterbacks, I think that they would also be looking to move Drew Lock too. But looking at the rest of the offense, I agree with you, Eric. I think that some people have the Broncos mocked to take a guy like Penei Sewell, the tackle from Oregon. That would be interesting because he plays left tackle, and then you're asking him to move to the other side. But you would think that a move like that would be doable. I think that when you look at this offensive line, the rest of the line looks pretty solid in terms of the starters there. You could look to add maybe some tackle depth, with, it seems like Elijah Wilkinson has moved on now, and not sure what's happening with DeMar Dotson here. So you might need some depth there. And I wouldn't be surprised if the Broncos look to do something at some point, whether or not that's a player like Sewell who would be transformative, or if they just feel like they just need a little bit of backup depth help there. Definitely some sort of offensive line help for sure in the draft.
And if you get a guy like Sewell, Phil, I think, we talked about last year how you'd have a pretty good evaluation of Drew Lock. If you were to get a guy like Sewell and now you've got a really good offensive line, you've got Cortland Sutton and year two of Jerry Jeudy and KJ Hamler and Tim Patrick, who has a lot more experience, and Melvin Gordon and Noah Fant in year two of Albert O. I mean, at that point, you've got as good of an evaluation of Drew Lock as you could possibly get. And he might take a step forward. He might take a huge step forward. He might take a step forward that you're pleased that he's gotten better, but it's still not enough. Or he might look exactly the same as he did last year, But in any case, you would get a really good evaluation of just him because everything would be in place around him, and you wouldn't be able to say, hey, well, if he had better receiver, like with Sam Darnold right now, the conversation is if he had better receivers, if he had a better offensive line, if he had if the running backs did more. Drew, you wouldn't have to say any of those things with Drew. You would have a very good evaluation of him, and maybe that's worth it to George Payton, who, to me, Phil, has taken a very patient approach for the most part. He hasn't done anything that's rash. If you make that decision to say, hey, let's just see what happens with one more year of Drew, you would get a good evaluation. Of course, the thing you don't want to happen, Phil, is to go 7-10 or 8-9 and be stuck in no man's land where you're then unable to get the quarterback. I mean, in the NFL, as we know, it's better to be really bad than it is to be somewhat bad.
Yeah, and just the way the team is constructed, unless there's a lot of injuries, I don't really see really bad in the future. I think that the odds of them being really good versus really bad, I would say good is more likely than really bad. That's what I would say. But one of the things that you have to weigh, though, with the offensive lineman is that this year's class is supposed to be pretty deep at that position. So if you didn't want to take a top guy like Sewell or Slater, then it would make sense to wait a little bit just because the depth is really strong in this year's offensive tackle group. The opposite side of that, though, is the running back position, where there's not supposed to be a lot of talent outside of the top guys. You're talking about Travis Etienne, Najee Harris, Javonte Williams, Michael Carter. There seems to be that group that's like the top, and then there's a major drop off. So,
yeah, I mean, if you look at the tackle position, Phil, Dean Brugler from The Athletic, he does like this big draft guide every year that you read it from start to finish. There's 26 offensive tackles, so not just offensive linemen, but 26 offensive tackles with draftable grades, including 16 that he says are worth drafting in the first 4 rounds. When you look at the running back position, he has 20 guys with draftable grades, but only 9 of those have 4th round or higher grades. And really, he only has 2 guys with 1st round grades, only 4 with 2nd round grades. So, like you said, Phil, the drop off is pretty steep there, and you might need to get a guy in the 3rd or 4th round if you want some sort of an impact player.
And you might be listening, being like, why do they need to draft a guy when they just let Philip Lindsay go? But obviously, if you draft somebody in the 1st round, if you trade back a little bit and then take a running back in the 1st round or in the early 2nd round, you're talking about an upgrade there in my mind, and also somebody who's much cheaper and younger. So that would be the argument there.
Yeah, and under contract for longer. Philip Lindsay was going to be under contract for 1 more year. Melvin Gordon is under contract for 1 more year. Even if you say you draft Javonte Williams in the 2nd round from North Carolina, got 4 years of Javonte Williams on a really reasonable salary. And even though the Broncos are a young team right now and have a lot of good players on rookie deals, we've seen Justin Simmons get signed. Cortland Sutton's going to be up for a new deal after this year. Got some other guys that are coming up as well. I mean, they're going to have to start paying some people, which is a good problem to have. It means you've been drafting well, but certainly getting younger and cheaper is never a bad thing.
And then the last position, I don't think they need to address wide receiver. I mean, that room is already stacked. So I don't see that in the cards, even though this wide receiver class, you thought last year was good. This year is really good too. But I don't think that the Broncos need to do that. But some sort of a tight end. I think you obviously have Noah Fant and Albert O right there, 1 and 2. But somebody who can bring a different element, the blocking. I think that would make sense to address that at some point in the draft.
Yeah, I think with Andrew Beck too, you've got somebody that you believe in to some degree. I wouldn't be opposed, Phil, to just waiting and signing a couple of like college free agents and just seeing who can make an impact there as a blocking tight end. I mean, if you can find a day 3 pick, that's great. But I just think that you can find other solutions there. And so I wouldn't necessarily waste like high draft capital on the tight end position.
Yeah. And that is assuming that Alberto's recovery from an ACL injury is going well, and they would know the details about that. So it is possible maybe they're like, oh, he's not going to be ready to go to start the season. We're going to need more help at that position too. So um, that is an area I think that they do need to address before the start of the season. Flipping to the other side of the ball, Eric, what do you think about this defense in terms of just the starters? Pretty solid everywhere except maybe if they wanted to upgrade middle linebacker, that's an area where some people have mocked like a guy like Micah Parsons who would just take the defense even to another level here. But certainly some very capable veterans in Josie Jewell and Alexander Johnson already there.
Yeah, I mean, I think most of the moves you would make on the defensive side of the ball are looking forward. So if it's a defensive lineman, to kind of just have more depth there as Mike Purcell and Shelby Harris get older. If it's a outside linebacker in case Von Miller's decides not to re-sign with the Broncos and he's gone after this year. Like you mentioned, at inside linebacker, Josie Jewell and Alexander Johnson will both be unrestricted free agents after this year. At cornerback, Bryce Callahan, Kyle Fuller, both unrestricted free agents after this year. Kareem Jackson at safety. So it's not necessarily, there's no immediate need anywhere, even though I do think you could maybe get a boost at inside linebacker. But I think any of those spots, maybe prioritizing defensive line a little bit less, but corner, safety, outside linebacker, inside linebacker, you could convince me that any one of those picks is worth, maybe the 9th overall pick, but certainly trading down a little bit. If you were to trade down and get like a Jamin Davis from Kentucky, he's a guy that's been rising up the board like crazy, an off the ball coverage linebacker. There's been some talk that Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah from Notre Dame could fall a little bit. Maybe he falls down in the second round and you get him, maybe you have to move up a little bit from 40, but maybe you're able to get him on day 2. If you look at some edge rushers, Gregory Rousseau is kind of considered the top guy there from Miami. But there's some other guys at that position with intriguing talent as well. At cornerback, obviously, we know, the J.C. Horns of the world and Patrick Surtains of the world. But maybe you slide down and get a Greg Newsome or somebody along those lines. Georgia's got a couple of good cornerbacks. So lots of really good options, Phil, I think. But none of them are – I don't look at it the same way I look at the offense where I think this needs to be fixed now. I think 1 or 2 or even 3 of those could be left till next year. It just might you might have to make some more difficult decisions next year, and this could give you a little bit more flexibility by taking care of it now.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I guess it just depends on whether or not they feel like they need to add some depth in some areas in case of injury. Broncos fans certainly know that there's a lot of injuries, particularly on that side of the ball that happened last season. So I could still see them taking like a Patrick Surtain with that 9th overall pick. That is possible just in terms of thinking down the line and saying, okay, what we have now is just very short term. Let's try to address that long term, like you mentioned there, Eric. Or on the flip side of that, they could say, look, we think this defense has a chance to be really good if we plug in a guy like Micah Parsons who can just take away the center of the field. Let's take this guy and make sure our defense is really, really strong. So I think you do have some flexibility there. But in terms of just looking at the different positions, like the safety starters are great. Maybe you at some point want to add a little bit of depth at safety, especially maybe a guy who could play special teams right away. Same with cornerback. If you don't end up getting one of the top guys, maybe you add some depth there. And then the interior of the defensive line, not strong in this year's draft. I think there's only one guy who might go in the first round. I think that would be the first time there was only one interior defensive lineman taken in the first round since like 1998 or something. So not a strong class in terms of the top end talent there. So I'd be surprised if they addressed that position, but everywhere else seems to be pretty short up in terms of the starting units.
Yeah, and, edge rusher is one of those positions that I think is interesting. Maybe you find a guy, maybe that makes the most sense just because I think maybe there's a higher chance that they like re-sign Kyle Fuller or Bryce Callahan at the end of the year and say one of those two guys can keep going, as opposed to you just don't know what's going to happen with Von Miller. Obviously, Bradley Chubb, you've got to decide on his option here after the draft. But there's some talent there with a Jalen Phillips, a Kwity Paye from Michigan, Jason Owa from Penn State. I mean, to me, there's not like that elite edge rusher that could go top 5 or top 2 the way that obviously Vaughn was back in 2011, the way Bradley was in 2018. But there are some good quality players there that you could add and really shore up that position. I think you'd feel really good about a room that had Vaughn, Bradley Chubb, Malik Reed, and any of those guys, because right now you do have to find somebody else to be that fourth guy, whether it's Derek Tuska, who was drafted last year, kind of developing into that role, or signing somebody else. But that's kind of an unknown. And based on, the injury history of Vaughn and Bradley, I do think you have to expect that at the very least you rotate those guys. And so they're going to be on the field more than like a fifth corner is going to be. And so to me, finding that fourth edge rusher is important. And then, Phil, I wonder too, at inside linebacker, how does the evaluation of Justin Sternad play into all this? Because he's a guy that they took a 5th round last year, I believe. They were excited about what he could do. Vic Fangio really talked highly about him, and then he never got on the field during the season because of a wrist injury. If they believe he can be a guy, then maybe you don't need to take a linebacker here.
Eric, do you think that what they do with that first round pick will sort of be an indicator in terms of what decision makers think about this year's unit? Like if they go out and get Micah Parsons, somebody like that, that might indicate that, hey, we feel like this team has a chance to compete, at least in terms of making the playoffs for sure, but maybe even be more dangerous than that, because now you're talking about a guy who you're going to plug in and play right away and expect big things out of immediately. Or if they go out and get like an edge rusher or a depth piece that's more long-term, maybe that's an indicator that, hey, we feel like this team's pretty good, but we overall want to raise the just overall talent of the whole roster.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good question, and I think I can understand why people would read into it one way or another, but I just don't necessarily buy that. I think you've got to take the best player at one of those positions regardless. Like, the best player available thing is a little bit misleading because, like, the Broncos are not going to take Jamar Chase if he's there at 9, a wide receiver from LSU. They're just not going to do it. I mean, so I'll do that. You can do this podcast by yourself, and I'll just go off into the wilderness if they do. But best player available within reason. But if that's Penei Sewell and you decide, hey, we can't afford to pass up a right tackle, even if Jawan James, might still be in the cards, or we can't afford to pass up Patrick Surtain, even though we've got a really good starting secondary, or we can't afford, like you mentioned, to pass up a good edge rusher that we think has greater value than somebody else at that position. To me, that doesn't indicate one way or another what they think about this year's unit, because with injuries, you never know if they might have to play anyway. But I think if you start trying to only fill, like if you say, this is just hypothetical, Phil, but say you have Penei Sewell as the 5th best player on your board, and you have Micah Parsons as the 10th best player on your board, and you view them both as needs, but you view inside linebacker as a more immediate need, and you choose Micah Parsons over Penei Sewell there with the 9th pick, passing up on a guy that you believe is a better football player. Everything we always hear scouts say, Phil, is that that's what gets you in trouble. When you pass up a better football player, especially a significantly or substantially better football player, for a guy that fills a need right now or that you think you need right now to take that next step. You've got to have elite, really good football players on your team. And so to me, it doesn't matter if it's this year, if it's next year or whatever, you've got to go that direction and not worry about like, hey, we're going to, because Phil, to me, even if you had Micah Parsons, there's so many, or whoever it is, there's so many other factors that are going to determine if you make the playoffs, that are going to determine if you can challenge the Chiefs. I mean, what happens if that rookie gets hurt on the first play of training camp? What happens if your quarterback goes down? What happens if there's all sorts of what ifs that in basketball, maybe you can make that decision, or probably not in baseball, but in football, you certainly can't, because it's so reliant on so many guys making an impact. And so I would be really nervous to try to take that sort of chance and do something like that.
The one thing's for sure is the Broncos sitting at 9, mocking what's going to happen in those first eight draft picks is going to be really difficult. I think that you got an idea that the first 4 are going to be quarterbacks, but after that, it could really go in any direction. You got teams that are sitting there that could really take things in any different direction. So mocking those picks and trying to understand where the Broncos, what their possibilities might be sitting at 9 is going to be tough. And in all likelihood, when they get to that pick, they're going to have a difficult decision to make, because there's going to be some really talented players that are still available there that if they sit at 9, there's going to be a tough decision that's going to have to be made. Because if you take Parsons, for example, that defense, you're not talking about just a top 5 defense, but it could become, the best defense in the NFL potentially, if you draft somebody like that. If you take somebody like Sewell, if he somehow drops, then I think you're saying, okay, that offensive line is really going to be good, but we're not going to have the top overall offense or something like that. So I think that there could be an indicator there, but maybe don't read too much into it, because ultimately where the Broncos are right now, they just need good football players. So whatever that means, that's what they need.
Yeah. And I would strongly consider, because I think there are several areas, like maybe like I would rather have like Jamin Davis and Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah and J.C. Horn or Greg Newsome than just one of Patrick Surtain or Micah Parsons. And so to me, if you're not, and I know, Phil, we've gone back and forth on what's the value of getting an elite football player at 9 versus a really good football player at 20, for example, and having an extra second round pick maybe. But to me, I think if you're not going to get a quarterback at 9 and you're not going to, and that might involve trading up, but if it's not going to be a quarterback and some generational talent, like there is talk that Penei Sewell just might be a really, really good tackle that's one of the best in several years. If you think that's his evaluation, then get him. But if it's a guy that, like Micah Parsons has been projected anywhere falling to like 15 to 16 to 17. Mm-hmm. If you're just not sure about a guy, I would move back if it's not a quarterback there. Get an extra pick, add a couple more really good reserve players that can be there and become starters. And I just think where this team is at, you need more depth. And so I wouldn't, it's not that I would be disappointed if they stay at 9 and took a guy like Patrick Surtain, because I think he's really talented. But I just think that maybe there's a way to add several talented guys on the same night. And I'd be really excited about that option.
I do think that when you're sitting at 9, you're hoping that you're going to take a cornerstone piece. You're hoping that you're taking a guy who's going to be a lifetime Bronco, who's going to be part of this building block here that the Broncos have with guys like Cortland Sutton, Bradley Chubb, Justin Simmons. You're hoping that you're getting a player like that where this is the base of your team for years to come. So if you do think that like Surtain is that, and you think that he's going to be a lockdown corner for, the next 15 years, then I don't have a problem if you take him at 9, if you think that's what he is. Now, if you think he's just like a solid starter there, then maybe you start trying to look back and try and find a trade partner. But if you think he's going to be like a legit, if you think Sewell's going to be like an all-pro type talent for many, many years, take him. You need people like that. So,
yeah.
Eric, enough football talk here. Let's talk about something a little bit fun. We've seen Aaron Rodgers guest host Jeopardy this week, and I think he's doing it next week as well. Aaron Rodgers and all that hair. I mean, if you think my hair looks bad, Aaron Rodgers has got a mop on top there, and it looks pretty greasy. I'll say that.
It looks pretty greasy. I thought he looked very professional. I thought he looked nice.
He did look professional because he had the suit and everything like that, but the hair was that's a bold look, if you ask me.
I think on Shailene Woodley's Instagram story, Phil, she
Yeah,
showed off the little ponytail he had on top of his head.
they call that a man bun, I think,
Yeah,
Eric.
she seemed to like it. So
Oh,
I
you
think
did think she did.
she said she liked it. She said she thought he was very handsome with the man bun. Um, I think if you're dating Shailene Woodley, you're probably doing okay. So I'll defer to Aaron Rodgers on the
Of course.
style.
Hey, I like it. I
Yeah.
think that you could tell that
You,
I'm a fan of that kind of a look. It's just
yeah.
that
Now,
it's a little different than
maybe
Alex Trebek. I'll say that.
that's true, but maybe Shailene has a type. Maybe she would really like your hair and say it's even better than Aaron Rodgers's. We'll have to check that out. I don't have her immediate. I think I have her email, but not her cell. So I'll just have to. Might take a little bit to reach out. Shailene, if you're listening and you have an opinion on Phil's hair, you can dial 707 neutral and leave a voicemail, or you can leave an email at neutralzoneshow@gmail.com.
Yeah. I mean, you just never know what she sees in Aaron Rodgers. I mean, it could be just
Yeah.
the hair. It could be the fact that like he's like a charming personality. He's funny. Maybe
I mean,
maybe
certainly
he's
not the rings. He's only got one of those. So
yeah, that exactly. And he spends half the year in Green Bay, which is tough
exactly.
if you're like a
Yeah.
Hollywood star, you know.
And he got killed very early in Game of Thrones. Like he made it like all of a couple seconds before.
Exactly.
That's what I hear anyway. I haven't watched that show, of course, because I'm working, but heard people love it.
But I have heard really good reviews about how he has just really taken on this role. He thinks that he might even be in the running for a permanent replacement there, Eric, as the host of Jeopardy. I know he loves Jeopardy. He takes it seriously. Like this isn't just like some thing that he's just like going through the motions with. He's practiced. He said that he studied and got better by watching Jeopardy and having it on mute and like going through an episode on his own. So he's done some homework here. He's gotten ready and he's really delivered here. But it made me wonder, Eric, who do you think on this Broncos team would be a good host?
Well, I mean, there's certainly, I'm going to cheat a little bit here, Phil. There's certainly some very good former players that I think.
This is a classic Delilah technique.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I want to get the good ideas out first. Like obviously Peyton Manning would be incredible at it and probably should just be doing it anyway. And I also think
he's a little busy.
Well,
he's a little busy.
True. Yeah. I think Aqib Talib would be very, very funny as a Jeopardy host.
Talking about current guys, Eric.
Okay. I think Kareem Jackson would be very good at it.
Okay. Do you think that you have to have a little bit of clout in terms of like, you kind of almost have to be like a quarterback or like a star like Von Miller in order to even have that opportunity?
So I'm choosing between Drew Lock and Brett Rippon. Is that what you're telling me?
I mean, we could dismiss that and just say, just based off of abilities, who would be good. Let's do it that way. So Kareem Jackson, obviously host of K-Jack TV. He's got the personality to do it.
I think you need to be able to have, like, you need to be quick-witted and like have the ability to like make a quick back at these people. Kareem has a very good, I think, ability to go back and forth to kind of pick up on what you're saying and make a joke in real time. He does a nice job reading the questions on K-Jack TV and has some entertaining ones. I think he'd be very good at when Alex Trebek would say, "So you flew in a hot air balloon around the world when you were 16 years old with your pet rabbit. Tell me about that." Like, I think Kareem would be very good at that element of the show.
He would bring the personality. I do think that people underestimate how difficult of a position it is. I mean, you're in charge up there and you've got to know exactly what all the possibilities are. You got to know what's coming up next. You got to know what direction you're going in. You got to know all the different possibilities that could happen every time you read an answer. And then on top of that, you have to be really smooth at your delivery. You got to be able to read the answer effectively so that they can answer. I think people underestimate how difficult of a job that is. And I think that really speaks to Alex Trebek's ability. I mean, he was tremendous at that. He made it look very easy, but it was quite difficult. I was going to say maybe like a Cortland Sutton could get to that, could get to that level.
Interesting. Cortland Sutton is a good choice. He has the I feel like you want a tall Jeopardy host, and he's got the height.
Yes, and he's like he's got a little like charm to him. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Where you kind of have to have a charming personality.
that's true.
Just
I thought you were going to say Justin Simmons, just
Justin Simmons
because
could be good too.
he, especially in recent years, has really developed this. He's the good guy award winner every year. He's very good at the microphone. Um, he would be a guy that I would consider as well.
Now, he does have broadcast aspirations, or at least he did when he first came into the NFL. I do remember, Eric, that when he first came into the building, I interviewed him, and I knew that he wanted to get into broadcasting at some point. I kind of put him on the spot. I said, hey, why don't you close the interview? Why don't you say something to wrap this thing up? And I could tell there was some hesitation there, you know, so
Mm,
I'm sure he's growing a lot in the last 5 years, but that did exist. So we'll see. We'll see. He does have that confidence in that, you know, he's got the stardom now. You know, he's the Pro Bowler. You know, he's got that stardom too. So that all factors into it, Eric.
that's right. You know, another guy that I think would want to be mentioned in this conversation, Phil, and probably because he doesn't have to practice all that much, would have time to get ready.
Brandon McManus.
Yeah, he's kickers. They've got funny personalities. I think he would do maybe he's like the occasional fill-in host or something.
You think he'd wear that like ski suit that he likes to wear often?
Exactly.
Maybe he could wear that.
Yeah, maybe Brandon's maybe more of a Wheel of Fortune guy.
Yes, he'd like to buy a vowel. Like he'd sell vowels all day.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that would be good.
Anybody that you think would be the absolute worst host?
Okay, so you sort of putting me on the spot, huh?
Yeah.
I mean, Kyle Fuller like didn't necessarily give a lot of lengthy answers. Maybe doesn't really like a camera in his face. Got that sense early on, and I also think like maybe Jerry Jeudy also gives pretty short answers. That's the sort of the doesn't seem like they enjoyed that aspect of being an NFL player as much as some other players do.
Yeah.
Obviously, who would you think, Eric? Give me some additional names besides those two, if you will.
No, I think we're ready to move on to our next topic. I think I wouldn't do a very good job. I'll say that.
Okay, got it. I do think
that's a classic gotcha situation. You should a real Jeopardy host would never fall into that situation.
Yeah, they would have turned the conversation immediately.
Exactly.
Yeah. Peyton would be good. Obviously, he's so polished and has done a lot of media work, so he would obviously be a perfect. Aqib Talib obviously got into the media a little bit last year. Hopefully, he calls some more games this upcoming season because he is always very entertaining.
Yes,
DeMarcus Ware would be an interesting host. I think that he would play the part well. I'm just not sure how well he'd be able to handle like a lot of moving parts all at one time. You know, like he's really good at go sack the quarterback. You know, that's what he's good at.
DeMarcus is a smart guy. He could handle it. He'd have a metaphor for every episode.
He's very posh. Like he would definitely look the part, you know.
Yes.
So he would not have the greasy, slick back hair like Aaron Rodgers, though. You'd be missing out on that. So, Eric, time for shout outs. Anybody that you want to highlight this week here?
Liz Mannis could be good.
Of course.
Yeah. In person.
Yeah, that's true.
Not sure. She had a correction, I think, from our last episode.
That's what I was going to say. A brief correction here from last week. We mentioned that Derek Tuska and some other players went to the Boys and Girls Club. Turns out that was a food bank of the Rockies, not the Boys and Girls Club.
Right, which was really just a test. We were seeing if Liz was paying attention to the podcast, to the shout out section.
And she was.
Yeah. Which we shouldn't have doubted.
I would say that Liz Mannis is probably our most loyal listener.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Sometimes I do think that she just skips ahead straight to this section, though. She would never do that.
Missing out on a lot of really good content if you do that.
She would never do that. She would never do that. Eric, also a shout out to Behind the Broncos, episode number 2 coming out Friday night at 5 p.m. Mountain Time on YouTube. Make sure you check that out. A lot of really good behind the scenes content here. The kind of stuff that we've never really captured before, Eric. We're talking about going on the road with George Payton and some of the other scouts, going to some of these pro days with them and really capturing what that lifestyle is like. We also got a peek behind the curtain at the free agency process, Eric. So some very, very cool content there coming out Friday, 5 p.m. right here on this YouTube channel, if that's where you're watching.
Wow, I can't wait. I set my alarm.
Eric, you know what would be nice is like maybe at like 4 o'clock, you watched the entire neutral zone. And then that's like a nice little way to just settle in. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And get ready for this episode. So
that sounds smart to me.
What's the name of the show, Eric?
Behind the Broncos, No Shortcuts, episode 2.
And then there's nothing else to that.
Nope, that's
like, got it. Because I think the first one was like the George Payton era is underway.
Oh, I don't know. I haven't been,
yeah,
I'm not you're a little bit more privy to the Behind the Broncos, No Shortcuts, episode 2 production process. So you may know more than I do.
Yeah. But that was impressive that you got that much out.
Yeah, well, that's what's open to the public, and that's what I know.
Got it. Okay. Well, we'll have to tune in to find out what the full title is. 5 o'clock, this Friday, on the Broncos official YouTube page. So make sure you check that out. Eric, anything else you wanna mention here?
No, I don't think so. It's been a pleasure as always, Phil. I appreciate you.
Thank you. The commenters are getting to you, aren't they?
Yeah, they are a little bit.
Thank you for being nice to me. It's a good change of pace.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And if I'm being honest, I thought your voice was really good today.
Yeah, no cracks at all, I didn't think. So that guy can, you know what he can do.
At first, I thought that it was James Earl Jones who I was doing the podcast
with.
Yeah. You know?
No, yeah.
Yeah.
True.
That's what I thought. That's sort of a voice icon, Eric. If you talk about whose voices, Sam Elliott, another tremendous voice. These are my idols, Eric.
That's true.
Eric, if people want to get a part and be a part of the Neutral Zone in a future episode, you can do so. 707 Neutral. Leave a voicemail and a call to action this week. Let us know who the Broncos should take in the first round. Leave a voicemail. Let us know. We'll play it on next week's episode of the Neutral Zone. How else can people get involved, Eric?
Well, you could email at the neutralzoneshow@gmail.com. You can always record yourself and attach it. It seems a little bit simpler to just record a voicemail, but you do what you want to do. You have any questions? You have any draft thoughts? I saw somebody on the YouTube page, Phil, said, who are some late round sleepers? Maybe we'll get to that question as we get closer to the draft. So send us your questions. We'll answer them right here on the show. Or you can just get us directly at Broncos Podcasts or at Eric Dalala, at Phil Milani. Lots of options.
Yes, there are a lot of options. Sometimes people aren't comfortable with the pressure of the beep. You're getting ready to leave a voicemail, beep, then it's like go time. No. Yeah. It's go time. So
it's really fall apart.
Yeah. So if you don't feel comfortable that way, there's other ways to get involved. Leave a comment if you're watching here on YouTube and smash that subscribe too. So we'll be back with plenty more draft coverage coming up next week. But until then, for Eric Dalala, I am Phil Milani. You've been listening to the Neutral Zone.